Chapter 17. Gregor Mendel. Gregor Mendel, an Austrian scientist, experimented in crossbreeding garden peas for 8 years and found out how the colors that are crossbred appear in successive generations. The same principle of inheritance works among human beings. Also, the factor that influences or determines heredity is called a gene. The science dealing with the genes and the influence they have on inherited characteristics is called genetics. In this lesson, you will learn how Gregor Mendel prepared the groundwork for this science, and why he is called the father of genetics. What makes a man have red hair, or blue eyes, or a long nose? We know now that our genes decide such things. In every cell of our body are the genes that make us what we are. The study of these genes and the influence they have on our character and appearance is called genetics. And the father of this science was Gregor Mendel. He was born Johann Mendel in 1822 in the village of Heinzendorf in Austria. His parents were poor farmers. Their farm didn't make much profit. As the only son, Johann had to learn to help his father. He shared his father's love of growing things, but to that love he added something of his own. Mendel. He was deeply curious about the way all living, growing things developed. Johann and his sisters, Veronica and Theresia, went to the village school like the other children of Heinzendorf. For most children, this was all the education they ever had or wanted. But Johann set his heart on a high school education. Let him go. His father said, "He's a clever boy, he deserves a chance to get on in the world." "But how can we manage without him?" said his mother. "The girls cannot do men's work on the farm. And can we afford to support Johann at high schools?" "We shall manage somehow," said old Mendel. They did their best, but they were just too poor to do it. Johann made his way up through 6 classes of high school. Most of the time, he simply did not get enough to eat. At last, his health broke down completely, and he had to leave school. He was just too weak and ill to continue. It was several months before Johann was well enough to help his father, and Veronica, his elder sister, had married and left home. So old Mendel was having to work harder than ever. Johann felt very guilty and worried about it. Perhaps overwork and worry about his son made old Mendel careless. In any case, a terrible accident happened to him. Mrs. Mendel was working in the kitchen when she heard a crash. "Johann, come quickly," she cried, running in the direction of the noise. There, pinned under a tree, lay her husband. "I tried to cut it down, didn't get out of the way," fast breathed the injured man. He was trapped by the heavy tree, and he was in great pain. He twisted and turned out but could not free himself. They got him out from under the tree, but it was clear that he would never be able to do the work of the farm again. "Whatever will happen to the farm?" cried Johann's mother. Johann stood silent, trying not to cry. To him it seemed like the end of the world. If he had to manage the farm all by himself, that would be the end of his hopes for a higher education. His father called the whole family together. "We must decide about the future," he said. "I cannot do the work of this farm. I think we should put it up for sale. Then I will give you a good price," said Veronica's husband. "It won't be like selling your farm to a stranger," said Veronica, "and you and mother can live on the money." "No," said her father. "I want Johann and Theresia to have some of the money. Then Theresia can have some when she marries, and Johann can have an education." Johann could hardly believe his ears. He could go to university. Then Theresia did a very generous thing. "I want you to have my share of the money," she told Johann. "You will need it to help you through university." "But I can't possibly accept it," said Johann. "You will need it for when you marry." "I will lend it to you then," said his sister. "Someday, when you're rich and successful, you can pay it back." "I will needs twice over," said Johann. For 2 happy years, Johann returned to his studies. But at the end of that time, the money was finished. Johann had to make another decision. He badly wanted to go on studying. But the memory of the bad years of struggling through his school without enough to eat still frightened him. "What shall I do?" he asked his teacher. "Why not go into a monastery?" was the answer. "Then you will be free to continue your studies, and you will never go hungry again." So in 1843, the brothers at the beautiful old monastery at Brunn received a new member. He took the name of Brother Gregor. 4 years later, in 1847, he became a priest. The monastery had a beautiful garden, and Brother Gregor took charge with several other brothers to help him. Outside the walls there was war and violence and disorder. Inside the monastery all was pleasant and peaceful. "This is where I belong," thought Brother Gregor, as he cared for his plants and trees. But soon he began to wonder if he ought to go out into the world and try to do something for all the suffering people outside the tall grey walls. Brother Gregor went to the abbot and asked him to send him as a priest to a nearby town. Brother Gregor was not a success as a priest. He saw too much pain and suffering, and it hurt and worried him that he could do so little to help. The worry of it all made him ill, and soon he was called back to his garden at Brunn. It is interesting to think that if Gregor Mendel had been a success as a priest, he might never have made his discoveries in genetics. But Brother Gregor needed more than a garden to occupy his lively mind, so he turned to teaching. "We need an assistant teacher in the school at Brunn," the head teacher told the abbot. "Would Brother Gregor like the job?" "Of course, we can only pay half a teacher's wages, as he wasn't trained to be a teacher, but I'm sure he will soon pass his teacher's examination." Brother Gregor was a great favorite with the children. For the first time in his life, he was getting enough to eat, and he became quite round and red-faced. He laughed a lot, and his lessons were always interesting. But he failed the examination that would have made him a regular teacher. The abbot decided to send him to the University of Vienna to study science. There he spent 3 years. In 1854, he returned with his degree in natural science to teach science at Brunn. All the Mendels were very proud of him. But the years went by, and Brother Gregor never managed to pass the examination to make him a fully trained teacher. He was clearly a clever man and a good teacher, but though he took the examinations twice, he failed both times. The trouble seemed to be that Brother Gregor did not stick to the answers in the books. He was too curious and too original in his thinking. That was a dangerous thing in those times, and examiners did not allow such people to become teachers. Brother Gregor faced his failure bravely. For 20 years he continued to teach as an assistant. "But I must do something," he said to himself, as if to make up for his disappointment. He threw himself into his work in the monastery garden. There were so many plants, so many species, all different from each other in so many ways. How he wondered, can we explain all the different shapes and colors and sizes too? Why, Gregor Mendel had a favorite saying. Out of the simplest things, he used to say to his pupils, "You shall know the truth." And what could be simpler than the ordinary garden peas which he grew for the monk's table? He bred and crossbred 22 different kinds of peas. He studied all their characteristics. He studied their seeds, their flowers, the height they grew to. And from 8 years' work and thousands of experiments, Brother Gregor found 3 things. First, when you crossbred 2 different kinds of plants, their next plants will all be one kind. For example, if you crossbreed yellow seed peas with green seed peas, they will produce all yellow seed peas. Next, when you crossbreed this first generation of plants, the next generation will have seeds of both kinds. For every plants with green seeds, there will be 3 with yellow seeds. This is because the gene that produces the green seeds is called a recessive gene. Thirdly, if you crossbreed plants with 2 or more different characteristics, you discover a third rule. Suppose that you crossbreed a plant with smooth yellow seeds with a plant with wrinkled green seeds. In the first generation, the smooth yellow seeds will be dominant. In the next generation, all the possible characteristics will appear. There will be 9 smooth yellows to 3 wrinkled greens, 3 wrinkled yellow ones to 1 wrinkled green. Brother Gregor began writing his report. I have the key, he said to himself, the key to the whole problem. On a cold winter night in 1865, Brother Gregor put on his long black coat and tall hat. Then he set out with his report under his arm towards the school where he was still only allowed to teach as an assistant. It was the meeting of the Natural History Society. 40 people had come out on that cold night to hear Brother Gregor speak. This is going to be good, one member said to another. Brother Gregor's lessons are so interesting. I'm sure this report of his will be really exciting. But how do you explain 8 years' work in a few minutes to people who have no understanding of your subject? For an hour, Brother Gregor spoke. Then he looked up at his audience and saw 40 bored and foolish faces. Not one of those 40 people had understood a word of what Brother Gregor was trying to tell them. I failed again, he thought. He felt deeply disappointed. As he gathered his papers together, he saw his audience leaving for home or pub, no wiser, though the ideas he had described were published among the Society's notes a year later. The article seemed to have no effect at all on scientific thinking. Either they did not fully understand what he was saying or did not recognize the importance of what he said. But my time will come, he said to himself. He went back to his garden and to the school, where the children loved him as much as ever. He told them jokes against himself. He took them all to the circus. When one of the monkeys ran off with his glasses, he only laughed. To his pupils, at least, he was a success. He tried hard to get his work noticed, but only one further article was published in 1869, and that did not attract any attention. Before he could start again on his work in genetics, there was an election for abbot of the monastery and Brother Gregor was chosen. At last Father Gregor could afford to be generous. He paid for Theresea's 3 sons to go to university. She had found a good husband, even without the money which she had lent to her brother. He made many other gifts to people in need. He was a good, wise, and hard-working abbot. But of course, it meant that he could not spend so much time in his garden. Although he was as interested in plants, insects, and the weather as he had always been, his scientific interests played a smaller part in his life. Being abbot of the monastery was not easy. The government put a heavy tax on church property. This Father Gregor refused to pay. This money belongs to God, he said. We will give you some money, but you cannot make us pay taxes. Everyone gave the abbot advice. They said he should give in and pay the tax, but he would not. The struggle went on and on. It wore him out until he was old before his time. At the age of 62, Father Gregor had a heart attack and died. Everyone was sorry to lose him, but only as a dear friend, abbot and teacher. Nobody recognized his work as a scientist until 1900, long after his death. In that year, Three scientists who were doing the same kind of work as Mendel had done, and with the same results, discovered that first article he had published more than 30 years before. "My time will come," Mendel had said. It did, but he did not live to see it or to know that he was a success at last.